Right, thanks very much. I don't know why I've been asked to make this little presentation. It will take the form of that famous picture of the Komsomolka standing reading a text with the portrait of Stalin behind her, and the title of the picture is Comrade Stalin, Leader, Teacher, Friend. I'm not the proper person to do this talk in terms of seniority. We have Galaxy, a former directors of CREES here who would have done it better. We have people with a longer association with CREES than myself. I arrived in 1972, sort of 10 years after it had been established. And there are people who have collaborated more closely with Bob than I have. But I have the virtue of having been one of his supervisees, maybe not the easiest. And it took a rather long time to get my thesis together. But Bob was somebody who showed great forbearance and the virtue of a supervisor who never sought to impose his view or didn't seem to impose them in a very overt manner. Nadezhda Krupskaya in her memoirs talks about Lenin and young Bolsheviks who he would subtly influence, who would go away with the ideas completely transformed without realizing what had actually happened in the exchange between them and their mentor. What I would like to say is that Bob's contribution is really very, very significant, both as the founding director of CREES. And by 1970 or so, I suppose there were 6 principal institutions that studied Russia, the Soviet Union. Essex, Swansea, London, Glasgow, Birmingham. And Birmingham was the place of choice, I think, for many postgraduates, that it already had this reputation as a centre that took its own particular view on developments, a kind of objectivist approach, an attempt to set aside ideological preconceptions. By the 1970s, this reputation was very widely recognised internationally. In Japan, there was even talk of the Birmingham School of Soviet Studies. It was that well recognised. If one was talking about what made CREES special, I think it was a quite unique kind of research culture that developed there. It was an extremely well-established community of scholars and a very productive body of scholars, held together by activities like the annual conference, but also a whole number of seminars and conferences that were organised throughout the year. And the notion of the breakdown of disciplines as well, it was a truly multidisciplinary centre where people, whatever their area of expertise, would turn up to hear presentations in other disciplines. And there was this cross-fertilisation of ideas that I think was extraordinarily productive. And it's important to bear in mind just how huge the contribution of CREES was from the 1960s onwards, that postgraduates from CREES went on to colonise departments in sociology, in economic history, in political science, in international relations throughout the country. Its impact was very, very significant and really very lasting. It has persisted, in effect, to the present day. Bob's position as the founding director, I think, helped to set the seal on this unique character that the centre had. And it was also ambitious in terms of trying to establish contact, particularly with scholars in the Soviet Union. Not an easy thing to do in the 1960s and the 1970s, but those contacts were being established really from the outset. And the idea that you could establish links across borders into the Soviet Union and into the countries of Eastern Europe. His skills as a supervisor for PhD and master students was really unique, I think. A sensitivity to the intellectual development of individuals and a way of pushing people in directions and opening up new possibilities for them. So his standing is remarkable both as the founding director of CREES and the way in which he shaped this institution in his formative years. It's his contribution as a teacher and supervisor, but above all, it's his standing as a scholar. And this is a reputation that was established very early on. In 1995, after Bob had retired 5 years from CREES, we did bring out a festschrift. It was edited by Julian, Maureen Perry, who's here somewhere, and myself. And it has a list of Bob's publications. At that stage, it had 19 books edited and written, and a monumental list of 99 articles that had been published. One would think that the festschrift marks a kind of denouement, an end of a career. But in fact, with retirement, we have a new second wind. And publications have continued to appear regularly. The major achievements, what could one say? The collaboration with CAR, another giant in the field, and Bob's collaboration with CAR on the foundations of a planned economy. And following CAR's death, the continuation of CAR's epic history of Soviet Russia in terms of the study on the industrialization of Soviet Russia, which Bob has taken on from CAR's volumes that terminate more or less in 1928-29, from 1929 up to, it looks like it will be 39, 10-year period. 4 big volumes on the industrialization of Soviet Russia. The last volume to appear was the history on the famine, the years of hunger, written with Steve Wheatcroft, which was published to widespread acclaim across the field and drew plaudits from rather unexpected quarters. People who didn't always agree with Bob in terms of his view of Soviet history, notably Robert Conquest, who was very complimentary about the achievement of this objective study of the mechanisms behind the famine and the motivations of those who were involved in decision-making. Bob has continued with this research. There are 2 volumes that are pending that will take the story of the development of the Soviet Union from 1933 right through the terror up to 1939. There are a whole number of other works that one could draw attention to, the various volumes on different aspects of economic history of the Tsarist and the Soviet era, the little studies on the reappraisal of the Soviet era, the book on Soviet history in the Gorbachev Revolution and the book Soviet history in the Yeltsin era are classics of their kind and extraordinarily informative in terms of their insights on the debates that were taking place and the political significance of those debates in the late 1980s through the 1990s. I don't want to say any more. We have been privileged to have somebody who has been a scholar of international stature, as somebody who was not only the founding director, but one of the central pillars of CREES in the succeeding decades. And here we are really delighted that you're with us to celebrate the 50th anniversary of CREES. Bob is now 88, I believe. And that what one is really impressed by is this commitment to scholarship and the extraordinary intellectual vigour that he continues to display, and an almost insatiable appetite for academic work and for pushing back our understanding of this extraordinary experience of the Russian Revolution and the aftermath of that. So I think people will look back, I think, on the volumes of Carr and Davies covering the period from 1917 to 1939 as a tremendous monument to the achievement of scholarship in Britain in the final decades of the 20th century, and they will put them alongside the other great monumental works. The attempt to provide a total history of a society. You can think of the parallels for yourselves, but this is not to put it too big an issue, it seems to me. It's really trying to understand the scale of the achievement and the recognition that that achievement deserves.
I'm very fortunate that Academician Fedorenko was doing this out of some kind of objective test, because if Academician Fedorenko had decided to hand me over to the KGB at that point, I think I and the centre might have been in some difficulty. I've received a number of letters from members of the centre and former directors of the centre. And one I received only yesterday, which I think deserves a mention, is from the well-known economist Mario Nutti, who wanted to be here but couldn't come, and was my successor as director of the centre. Mario was brilliant in economics and in academic writing, but he couldn't be described as the most tactful person in handling university bureaucracy.
That's putting it very mild.
A compliment to Mario, I think. But I began to get worried about how long he would remain in Birmingham as director of the centre, when he rushed into my room at a time when I thought all the troubles of bureaucracy had been taken off my shoulders, and said about the professor in charge of the centre, a professor of dentistry called Marsland, who was an unfortunate chap with whom I have great sympathy because he was in a wheelchair. And he rushed into my room and he said, "I'd like to tip Marsden out of his wheelchair." The thing I have been most gratified about in the development of the centre is that there's been such great success in appointing leading members of the centre, and particularly centre directors. And I think we're particularly lucky in having Tim as director of the centre in this transition time. It's Tim's efforts that have got this 50th anniversary going, and I think deserve our congratulations for the success.